Hey there, all you ghouls and goblins. Radio 85.9 proudly presents Horror Zoid with your hosts, Stevie Scares and Natalie Nightmare, talking all things horror from the 80s, 90s, and today. Today's episode is brought to you by Wolfman Chest Wax. Go from the toughest fur to the smoothest skin with Wolfman Chest Wax. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Horror Zoid. I'm Stevie Scares.
And I'm Natalie Nightmare.
And today, it is about one of our favorite subjects.
Ow!
Werewolves.
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 Hell yeah, werewolves.
Yeah, we're talking werewolf movies today. We already paid tribute to vampires and ghosts and even slow burn movies. But we wanted kind of to go back. We kind of wanted to go back, if I can speak English today.
Good job. You're starting out strong.
Kind of wanted to go back and talk about some more creatures, some more entities that we like, and that's werewolves.
Yes. I think people liked the vampire episode.
Just a bit.
Just a bit. Everyone wanted to be in the vampire nightclub. So let's dive into werewolves, starting with the icon.
Yes, the original werewolf movie, The Wolfman, from the 40s, Universal classic Universal monster movie starring Lon Chaney Jr., who had the opportunity to follow in his father's footsteps. Great Lon Chaney Sr., who portrayed the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera, Quasimodo and Hunchback of Notre Dame. And then we had Lon Chaney Jr., who just created one of the most iconic characters in all of cinema, the original Wolfman.
Yes. I think everybody knows the Wolfman at this point. Obviously, he, like Dracula, brought many others after him.
Of course, yeah, the Wolfman, and of course there were sequels that featured various other characters and interactions. Werewolf and the Wolfman meets Dracula, Daughter of Wolfman, Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman. Yeah, there were all sorts of little sequels. Universal really got their money out of that property. While we're on the subject of the Universal Wolfman, again, it kind of spawned every other werewolf feature that we would see in the future. But the ones that I think many people remember, of course, Lon Chaney Jr., and then, of course, Universal tried to recapture that magic in the 90s when it was rebooting a lot of the classic monsters, and we got the film Wolf with Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer, in which we really don't see any werewolf action till the very end. Jack Nicholson turns into a wolf at the very end of the movie, and we barely get any wolfy goodness.
Yeah, I remember the movie, but I don't remember the movie.
Right. Well,
I don't think I've seen it in a long time, too, though. So, but I do remember that part. Yeah,
it was Universal's failed attempt in the 90s to kind of take advantage of some of those properties of the Universal monster movies. That's when we got this movie, and we unfortunately got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with Robert De Niro. And Helena Bonham Carter.
I loved that movie.
It was okay. It wasn't all it could have been, but it was
something special about that movie to me.
You know, and then we had Mary Riley, which tried to capitalize on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which John Malkovich as Jekyll and Hyde is pretty impressive. But that, of course, the greatest out of all of them gave us Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes.
The Francis Ford Coppola, we talked about it on the vampire episode. So Universal really tried to recapture that magic in the 90s, which gave us Wolf. And then again, in 2010, we got a straight-up The Wolfman, starring Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, another one I haven't seen probably since it came out, honestly. I don't really remember how much I enjoyed it. But I think there's something interesting with Wolfman. As you know, you look at Dracula and how much you can change Dracula and just kind of build on what he has. Wolfman is kind of like, it really just limits you to one type of Wolfman, to be real.
Yes.
And I think it limits itself because they want to keep it true to the iconic Wolfman. But then you start to branch out and you get these more typically vicious beasts, you know, that transform. And I like that you have all of those different ones. But I think Wolfman is kind of, you know, they've been trying to do all of these movies again, you know, with The Mummy and things like that, and Invisible Man, although that one was brilliant. I would kind of worry about them trying to do a Wolfman now. Like, I would like to see somebody try, but I kind of worry about how they would do it.
Well, it's funny you say that because at least what's on the horizon is it seems like Ryan Gosling has really been trying to get the next Wolfman movie made with Universal.
I take back my prior statement.
Right. Well, and it's Ryan Gosling, and from what it sounds like, if the rumors are true, he's supposed to have a lot of control over the film. Like he'll get to pick the director. I think he may have already even done that. But again, it's still very much in the early stages, so it'll probably be a while before we see a true follow up to the Wolfman.
Right.
But from what I remember about the 2010 movie, because I'm with you, I haven't seen it really since it came out.
Yeah.
But I remember it being heavy on the special effects. Now, not
Yeah.
quite to the level of 2004, 2005's Van Helsing movie, which was just all CGI. But
Yeah.
it was. I remember it being very heavy on the CG, and it not being very good, and the tone was very dark. It was like honestly, it reminded me of the last few Harry Potter movies, where it was just
Right.
black and gray, and while that might work, it wasn't. I don't know. It didn't have the charm of like when Tim Burton does that, when the Harry Potter movies
I feel
did
like
that.
that's more of a mood for a vampire movie. And that might just be me, but I feel like, that you look at some of the Dracula movies and other vampire movies, and they do have that kind of dreariness to them.
Yeah. This just kind of almost
Wolfman
took it
is
too far.
Yeah, I do kind of remember that with the CGI, now that I
Yeah,
mention
heavy
it.
CGI, a lot of, we talked about it in the last episode with The Ring, how it had that blue aesthetic, to make it look like Seattle. I don't know what this was supposed to make it look like, but it was just it was almost too, like, visually too dark.
Yeah.
And I think it could have benefited from, just, I don't know, enhancing a little bit. It was just, I don't know. There was something that wasn't aesthetically pleasing about that movie.
Right. And, in last episode from last week, we talked about the CGI that we got from a lot of ghost movies. And I feel like that, whenever you're dealing with a creature, I know obviously back in the day things were different with CGI. We've come a long way with how things are done, and the way we have motion capture, was a huge thing when it started. But I feel like there's so many movies that just use it when it would almost be easier to just do practical.
Right, and the movies that have done it practical, and we're going to talk about quite a few of those today, the movies that have done it practical and have taken that risk, it's really paid off.
Right.
Even when they don't have full budgets available to them, which we've seen with, again, some of these other ones that we'll get to here in the future. But, I just wanted to touch on real quick the kind of the history and the folklore surrounding werewolves.
Hell yeah, let's go.
Started in, medieval times, of course, when they would see these large beasts in the moors, and there's still legends about them. One of my favorites is the Black Beast of Exmoor out in England. But they would see these large beasts, and they would exaggerate the size of these creatures, these dogs, these wild dogs that they would see out on the countryside.
They're kind of like an OG cryptid.
Right, it was, but they weren't really cryptids as much as
Right.
they were just people exaggerating the sizes of these
Yeah.
dogs, saying they were man-sized.
Right.
And then, of course, the folklore just simply grew from there, and it became the legend of men who turned into wolves, and by day, and or men who they were men by day and wolves by night, and that was where kind of these legends started, and then from there we got a lot of really cool stories passed down
Yeah.
over generations. It was all these oral stories that were passed down to future generations of beasts, these wolves that were the size of men, and created the folklore that we know today, and then ultimately led to these movies.
Right. I think that's great. And it's kind of one of those creatures as well that it has different origins depending on what part of the world you look at. Their own stories, and different types of werewolves that we get,
Yes.
and different names. And I love that. And I think that's something that's really cool. I feel like you have many types of werewolves as opposed to our counterpart. Everyone wants to talk vampires versus werewolves. And, vampires obviously have been given a lot of different types, but I really like seeing, the way werewolves have evolved over the years in movies. You have one of my favorites, these huge, tall, standing up on two legs werewolves like in Dog Soldiers. But then you have these like short, kind of smaller, running on all fours, kind of crazy and beastly. And I don't know. There's something about werewolves that I'm just super excited to talk about because there are so many different types of them.
Right, and there's no wrong way to do werewolves. We've seen a bunch of different filmmakers try to attempt to do
Right.
different things with them, different TV series, and while we're on the subject, you brought up Dog Soldiers. I figure that's the next best one to talk about.
I
Dog
fucking
Soldiers.
love this movie.
Yeah, Dog Soldiers. I was not familiar with. You introduced me to Dog Soldiers, but I love Neil Marshall. He
Right.
did some of my favorite movies. Did The Descent, Doomsday, and of course Hellboy, the 2019 Hellboy. But his one of his first big movies was Dog Soldiers,
Yeah.
which was it's a werewolf movie, and it's such a unique and different take on a werewolf movie. When we mention his other films like The Descent and Doomsday, like thinking about the tone and the atmosphere and just how those movies feel very gritty and grimy, and Dog Soldiers feels that way too. It almost feels like
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you have these military training exercises, so you've already got these men who are kind of roughing it out in the wild, and then they start to have encounters with a beast, and it goes from 0 to 100 really fast.
fuck yeah, it does.
I mean, just gonna say, duct taping your guts back in.
I fucking love the guy who is just bleeding out and his organs are spilling out of him, but he
like,
keeps
just
going the whole
going.
fucking movie.
He goes longer than what you ever fucking think.
Like, I just kept thinking to myself, he's gotta die now. No,
No,
they
he
just
keeps
keep finding
going.
ways to keep this fucking guy alive.
Yeah.
It's terrific, and you do like you said, you get some of the best, really practical effects for the werewolves.
100%. Yeah.
What?
Because there's no
yeah.
CG in that movie.
No, well, no. Neil Marshall creates a very organic looking, organic feeling creature the way he designs the werewolves in this film.
Which is beautiful, because if you look up, the costume design for them, it's basically people standing on kind of like these platform style shoes to give them the kind of dog jointed legs, and then whatever kind of bodysuit prosthetic pieces that they have, and then this giant head. So they just appear so almost
fucking massive.
Yeah, I mean, that scene when the one stands up and the bedroom is just looming over them is iconic. And they're so fucking scary looking.
Yeah, I'm a little pissed off because I remember when we watched it on Blu-ray at home.
Yeah.
And the menu just is that shot of it standing in the bedroom.
Yeah.
I'm like, you dicks! That would have been so good to see, like, just come up, like, not knowing it's gonna come up, but that shot. Thankfully, though, it's like that shot on the Blu-ray menu or whatever.
Yeah,
it's so crystal fucking clear that you're like, how is that thing so damn big?
Right. Yeah, and the still of it doesn't do it any justice.
It doesn't. You have to see it in action.
And knowing it is people with basically platforms and prosthetics running around, and the fact that you kind of, it keeps that traditional like wolf face, but such a humanoid,
it's got that
muscular
snout,
body.
yeah.
It is such an awesome movie.
Yeah, it is. It adds to the werewolf lore and culture, and it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but it does tread new ground.
Yeah, and I think, the story just between the men, along with the people that they meet along the way, I mean, the movie isn't just a typical werewolf movie. I think it gives you a lot more to it, and it makes you appreciate the characters a lot more as you go along.
It does, yeah, because it's not just a werewolf movie. It's this really great story of camaraderie and almost brotherhood with the military guys that are in the film, and this woman that they meet that kind of saves them and brings them to safety.
Yeah.
And it just takes all these really interesting twists and turns along the way. And again, one of the things that I love that Neil Marshall does in this movie that he also does in The Descent and other movies that he's done is he creates that sense of dread and terror, and he puts the main characters in such a dangerous position that you almost wonder to yourself, you think every time, like, how could they possibly get out of this? And yet they find ways to get out of it.
Because, I mean, just their initial encounter, you're like, how the fuck did any of them
how will
get
they
out of
survive?
that? Right. Because there's obviously it's no spoiler, they find some of their men, like, slaughtered, but it's the fact that these guys, work together almost like they're in an active mission at this point. And
Right. It's almost like they
it
like the
kicks in.
exercise never stops.
Right. And
Yeah.
it just keeps going. And it kind of, it goes from a drill to not a drill. And it just goes until the brutal end. It's an awesome movie. You need to see it.
Yeah. Dog Soldiers, I'm glad you introduced me to that one because it has since become one of my absolute favorite werewolf movies.
Yeah.
Some other ones that we have to mention here. One I haven't seen in forever that I think we just need to touch upon because of its transformation scene is The Howling.
Yeah. It's
Howling,
probably been like 15 years since I've seen any of those. And I
it's
remember some of the
been
weird ass
forever.
sequels.
Yeah. I know Dee Wallace.
Yeah.
Classic, it's a classic. Dee
Yeah.
Wallace gives one of her best performances in it. She is an absolute scream queen. And the fact that we didn't mention her in our Scream Queen episode, shame on us. But Dee Wallace, I do remember her performance stood out to me in that movie, and that's something
Yeah.
that I still remember, along with that transformation scene.
Right. You get the, I think that they just, there was I can't even get it out. There was a set of movies that I feel like they really just wanted to focus on that transformation. Because, American Werewolf in London, iconic, has a super long transformation scene. And The Howling is kind of a close second, you know?
Well, yeah, and it's funny you mentioned American Werewolf in London because the I'm terrible with the names right now, but basically originally Joe Dante, director of The Howling, was I believe it was Rick Baker. I could be wrong about that he wanted to work on The Howling. Well, then Rick Baker got the job for doing American Werewolf in London because these
That's
movies came out
wild.
at the same time. So
Yeah.
Rick Baker gave his apprentice at the time the job for The Howling, and he took American Werewolf in London.
Wow.
And it's so funny that that we have all these ties together. That John Landis takes Rick Baker, I believe it was, and takes him and has him do American Werewolf in London. Meanwhile, Joe Dante takes Rick Baker's assistant. Like I said, like they were balling on a budget
Yeah.
with that werewolf transformation. You could tell they didn't have near as much money as American Werewolf in London, but they still did this beautiful job with the transformation scene.
Yeah. I mean, the practical effects that they put into it, I always remember the kind of like buggy-eyed face while his face is kind of warping.
Yeah.
And, the wolves in The Howling have a really cool look. I love their like huge pointy ears, kind of like how dog soldiers are. It's like they're almost too big.
Yeah.
But there's something about them that look really cool, and it still has a kick-ass transformation scene. It's honestly one that we need to come back and watch.
Yeah, we'll definitely, we'll have to watch it again and some of the shittier sequels. But the next one I think we have to talk about is one we've mentioned just now, American Werewolf in London.
Yes.
To me, it is probably the quintessential werewolf movie.
Sure. I mean, we kind of talked about last week being able to, rank on a micro level. And I feel like if anyone that wants to rank, they always have American Werewolf in London either first or second or third.
Right.
In their
It's
lineup.
it's always top three. Everybody appreciates what they accomplished with that movie.
Yeah.
Even if John Landis is a giant piece of shit.
100%.
But yeah, American Werewolf in London comes out in 1981. It has, again, John Landis, world famous director, did comedies like Animal House before he transitioned into doing this. And of course, the infamous Twilight Zone incident. Won't get into it. Google it if you want to know what we're talking about.
Twilight Zone incident. You'll see.
Horrible accident.
Yeah.
But, And, John Landis before all that, or around all that time, was directing American Werewolf in London. Stars David Naughton, Griffin Dunn, just one of the best werewolf movies ever. It also one of the best 80s movies of all time, I will say, because it just has that early 80s feel to it.
It's got the vibes.
It does.
Yeah.
It has the vibes. And John Landis, for all his faults, does a wonderful job of creating an atmosphere that feels gloomy and dreadful because it is a horror movie, but it takes place in London, in the big city, and
I know
you
this
still
sounds
capture
weird,
that. Yeah.
but that movie feels wet. You start,
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
with
the
the
whole-
way they're
yeah,
hiking.
it has a very
and,
wet
you know,
feel to it.
And like even his transformation, like he's just wet. Like you see,
That was how they covered up. That was how they did the special effects. So they
Right,
had to
you
make
know?
everything look wet, or
It's
it wasn't gonna look realistic.
right. It's like you kind of totally off topic here, but you think of the xenomorphs in Alien. They're
Yep.
like, what do they need? Fucking put KY jelly on them.
Right.
There
If
we
it
go.
didn't look wet, it was gonna look weird.
Right,
Like
they
imagine
would-
all of these things
a
that you're talking
dry
about.
alien or a
Yeah.
dry werewolf
Right.
transformation.
Right.
But I think that's something that they got right because the way he transforms and his body shifting, you think of the way your, you know, the fluids in your body and just even in your skin layers are, and like you're also in pain and you're probably sweating, and it's like, you know, the part I think that hurts me the most is when his legs are like extending, like his ankles and
Oh
shit
my
are changing.
God, yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, the face and everything about that transformation is a fucking 10 out of 10. But the feet thing always, I don't know, it always hurt me.
Yeah, I think the snout scene, like the part of the transformation where we see the snout
Yeah.
elongate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that jaw stretching shit.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
Exactly.
But it will probably go down. I think a lot of people will sit here and can honestly say it is probably the greatest transformation scene in all of werewolf cinema.
yeah.
You know, it's like we went, because you think about it when we were talking about the Wolfman earlier, we go from this scene where you just see like it fades, you know, like that shitty kind of fading onto the skin where you can tell they just like pieced two shots together.
Yeah, the two shots together, and it just
Yeah.
looked like someone put cotton fluff on him. And
Right, exactly, yeah.
he's still got like the flannel shirt on or whatever, and like, you know, he's the Wolfman. He's not this, you know, super deformed beast like we get with later werewolves.
No, they just glued hair to Lon Chaney Jr. and said, he's a wolf.
Wow.
Meanwhile, fast forward to 1981 in American Werewolf in London, and John Landis is like stretching David Naughton out like he's a fucking Stretch Armstrong doll. It's fucking, it's nuts.
I mean, that's a way to put it.
Yeah, but the rest of the movie though, it's like there's so much more than just the werewolf aspect to it too. I know we're talking about werewolf movies, but I think one reason that it stands out and will be remembered as one of the best werewolf movies is because of the other parts that make it such a well-rounded story. The friendship between David Naughton and Griffin Dunn's characters throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
How even after he, you know, his best friend is killed, he still sees him. He still lives on in his subconscious. The relationship
It's
that
very
he forms.
Pet Cemetery.
It is very Pet Cemetery. It's like you can almost see the inspiration from Pet Cemetery, what they got with Pascal, you know,
Yeah.
what we see with Griffin Dunn's character.
Right, because he's kind of like a good ghost, but a little guilty, you know, vibes.
Right.
and-
He's almost the little devil on the shoulder. He's like, he's not the
Yeah.
angel on the shoulder. He's not the
Yeah,
devil on the
yeah.
shoulder. He's just kind of the guy who's just like, let's fuck around and find out.
Right.
And then you get these great deaths and these amazing prosthetics. And I think one of my favorite scenes is when they are in the porn theater and he's seeing all the
yeah.
ghosts of all the people that he's killed as a werewolf. And he's like trying to,
Yes.
yeah, he's like coming
Holy
to
shit,
terms.
I forgot about that.
Oh
scene
my
for
god,
a
it's
second until you
hands
said
down one of my favorites. And then when
Yeah.
he transforms in the
Oh, when he
theater, and then it
transforms,
leads to this amazing scene where
alleyway.
he's just being chased through the city. It's like that's how you know, for some reason back in the 80s they got big budget movies right, because like for the time that was a big budget
Yeah.
movie. It was a lot of money to put into a fucking horror movie, especially. But it was John Landis. They were going to let him do whatever he wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
And he just creates this beautiful piece of fiction, kind of like what we were talking about with Dog Soldiers takes the folklore and the legend that we're already familiar with werewolves and the Wolfman and things like that, and just spins it on its ear, you know. And American Werewolf in London was probably the big one, like around the, you know, Howling came out same
Yeah.
year. Those two really helped revive werewolves in film, like, because you think about it, there's not a lot between the 30s or the 40s when Wolfman came out and the 80s when American Werewolf in London came out. There's not a ton of notable stuff. Hammer, of course, did some beautiful work,
Yeah.
with, you know, Peter Cushing involved in Christopher Lee, but it was just I don't know. It's like those kind of
It's kind of it's like a lull, and
right.
I feel like
there was a bit of a lull. Nothing in the
kinda-
mainstream. Hammer was very
Right.
specific.
Yeah.
There was a small group. We a lot of people have found a love and appreciation for them here recently, but back in the day, Hammer was a very niche kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there wasn't any, like American Werewolf in London. When I say it kind of revived it, I mean mostly for the mainstream, and we started getting just all these werewolf movies, and we talked about it in one of our first episodes with the slasher craze.
Yeah.
Horror movies in the 80s took on a new life
Yeah.
because of all of these things that were happening.
Absolutely. I think that's perfect. And I was kind of thinking, you're talking about like a bit of a lull with the werewolves. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, aren't we kind of in another one of those? Like, I feel
Yeah,
like
I couldn't tell you last time we've had a good werewolf movie.
Well, I mean, there's been decent ones. Early 2000s, we got some kind of fun little, it was right alongside the nightclub vampire aesthetic. You had sexy but vicious werewolves. So you had Cursed came out.
I fucking love Cursed. And for
And-
those of you who don't know, 2005, I want to say Wes Craven stars Christina Ricci, Jesse Eisenberg,
I think Shannon
Joshua
Elizabeth
Jackson.
has a moment in that.
I think Shannon Elizabeth. I think you're
she
right.
gets like ripped in half.
Yeah,
but-
Maya,
Maya,
the singer,
yeah.
and but yeah, Joshua Jackson is in it as well.
Okay, but let's just talk about that sexy cast. But then you add in werewolves.
Right, exactly, and it's a whole. The fun angle that this one takes is it's more of a mystery. Who is the werewolf? You know,
Yeah.
it's like
It's like Clue.
right,
with
and
werewolves.
and it's just got the most for it being 2000, like the mid 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
It is. Is it 2005? It's like I'm like
I
I
wanna
say
s-
that
I
cast,
wanna-
and it's
no, I
like
wanna say so.
I'm like that sounds almost too late for that cast because we have, like I said, Christina Ricci, Joshua Jackson, Judy Greer's in it. It's more of a 90s cast, but yeah, it's like it's funny to me to sit here and think like just that cast just it's bizarre to me.
It is bizarre. But
You're
there's
fact checking me, right?
I started to type in the curse and I was getting other shit.
Yeah, but it's one of those strange ones.
2004. You were
2004, but still, like that seems really late for that cast. But it's a
does.
terrific cast. It's a terrific
and
movie.
it's a fun movie.
It is a fun movie. Bowling for Soup has a fun cameo where they contribute
do.
to the soundtrack.
See, early to mid 2000s were the shit for that because Idle Hands, you had Offspring.
Right?
I
Yeah.
want that shit. Give me that shit again.
Yeah. But Wes Craven does Curse. So the
Yeah.
legendary Wes Craven, he tackled vampires in Brooklyn, and now he's tackling werewolves in the year 2004. It's one of my favorites because it is one of the more fun werewolf movies that's out there. It does have a little bit of a mystery to
Yeah.
it, but it has that sexy mid 2000s feel to it. Because think
Right.
about it, this is Wes Craven between Scream 3 and Scream 4.
Right.
And at that point, he was just fucking wilding.
And Curse doesn't have. He was.
He was like I'm gonna do fucking Cursed. I'm gonna do My Soul to Take. Like the movies he did
Dude,
around
My
that
Soul
time.
to Take
Red
is
Eye.
awesome. I will fight you for it.
I love My Soul to Take and Red Eye. Like Wes Craven.
Red Eye's amazing.
From between Scream 3 and Scream 4, he was just like, I'm fucking untouchable. What are you gonna do?
Right. 100%.
Cursed was a lot of fun.
But it's still sexy vampires sexy werewolves.
Right.
But you also go into coming from the 2000s, you have the Underworld series, which we talked about the vampires.
But we got to talk about them with werewolves
We
because they
gotta
do
talk
werewolves pretty fucking
I mean,
badass.
that's the whole thing. There's fucking movies about their war. So
The vampires and the lichens.
the vampires and lichens.
The war has waged on.
Every beginning and end of the Underworld movies is all.
It always
just
gives
her.
us the
I love it.
backstory of like
And a
vampires and
recap.
lichens have fought for centuries. No shit, Celine. Can we move on? I know that story. Tell me what's going on in this film.
Exactly. I fucking love those movies. But that's one of my favorite werewolves because they are these kind of they shift a little bit away from the wolf look, like the typical look.
Yeah.
And they kind of give us something beastly. I love how fast they transform. They can do it at will. They don't just need a full moon, which, we've had other werewolf movies that start to stray from just the full moon trope. But they're just such a cool werewolf, but they are also sexy. Like, let's be real.
Well, in the first movie, you have Michael Sheen, one of my favorite actors.
God. Michael
playing-
Sheen, amazing.
Yeah, Michael Sheen is tremendous. And I just love the fact that he was Lucien and
Right.
Of course, because of personal reasons, wasn't in the second movie.
Yeah, don't blame him.
But thankfully, you know, he comes back for that third movie, that prequel.
Yeah.
Which to me, I'll stand by this. I think Rise of the Lycans is the best in the series.
Do not sleep on that.
No.
Like, I love that it gives us a werewolf-focused movie in the Underworld series.
Right,
because
we
it's
get to see
werewolves and vampires.
Right.
Like, I get it's mainly following Celine, and I know it obviously gives like an origin kind of leading up, even though we know her backstory.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people kind of maybe just shit on, because you start Underworld and then you go into a prequel, and with any prequel, you already know what's gonna happen.
True.
And I think some people just can't enjoy watching what happens before shit. And I think they just wanted Celine, you know?
I think ultimately that's what did it in it, is it was Underworld without Kate Beckinsale, and therefore it didn't feel like Underworld. But to me, like I said, I'm a huge Michael Sheen fan. I think he did tremendous. He was at the height of his career, because when that came out, he had just done Frost Nixon, which had gotten him so much attention and actually got him in discussions for awards. Yet here he comes back to an original role of his that really helped him break into the mainstream in when he went back to do Rise of the Lycans. And it was great, because we almost got to, you know, I think as long as Kate Beckinsale and Len Wiseman are involved in the future installments, you know, I don't think we'll see Michael Sheen again. So I think it was nice to get that little bow on Michael Sheen's role as Lucian and see more of the werewolf-centric storylines that we got in that movie. And one thing I also love, too, is Kevin Graveau, who plays one of the more integral werewolves, actually did a lot of the graphic novel work on some of the Underworld novels. Cool. So he got to play a werewolf, a lycan, in the film, but he's also very instrumental behind the scenes and creating the folklore and adding on to the story and enhancing it through these really graphic novels.
You know, graphic novels, I think that's something I love, that you get the chance to have people build on a world that's already been created. And sometimes some of those can be even better than the movies. Some
of them can, yeah, absolutely. If you have the right storyteller behind it, it really can help, like I said, enhance everything. And that's what Kevin Graveau has done, in my opinion, is he's done just a terrific job with those novels and helping continue the legacy of the Underworld series. And, you know, I don't know if we'll ever get another Underworld movie. You know, Kate Beckinsale, Michael Sheen's daughter, is getting to an age where maybe she could play Celine in a reboot. I would love that, but, you know, we'll see. I think...
I mean, you know, I hate to say it, but when you play a vampire, you still age. And Celine can't go on forever in movie form, you know, unless they just go into a different storyline. Like, obviously, there's going to be death dealers all over the world. They can always pick up and start anew.
Well, and we also got the story with her daughter, Eve, right? Yeah, Eve. Eve. So, I mean, we can continue the story that way, but I also think I've heard rumors of just a hard reboot and just completely starting the series over again, the franchise.
I'd be okay with that.
It's one of those series where I feel like we've seen enough Celine, we've seen enough Kate Beckinsale, and I think we can kind of move on. And I think we can. I think a reboot wouldn't be the worst thing for the Underworld series, because I'd like to see maybe even something more grounded, where we get some, you know, different filmmakers' interpretation of what the Lycans and the death dealers and the vampires and everything and the elders could be. I think it would be wonderful to see what somebody else could add to that.
So I want to see futuristic vampires then. So if we can have cool leather-clad nightclub vampires, I want to put those in like a fucking Blade Runner movie and be like, I mean, vampires live forever. Let's get a future vampire movie.
Okay, vampire Blade Runner. Hit us up, horrorzoidpod@gmail.com if you want to buy that. There's our pitch.
Yeah, that's our pitch. Can you imagine like a Celine type, but her jacket's clear like the chick in Blade Runner for the moment?
I would fucking love that. I feel like the soundtrack...
Like neon lights on it.
Yes, and the soundtrack would feature this really techno version of "In the Air Tonight" by Phil Collins. You know, or the trailer. The trailer definitely would have one of those slow build, like you hear like just a piano note, and then all of a sudden it builds, and it's "In the Air Tonight," and then it's like they're fucking vampires in space, yo.
I mean, why not? Let's do it. Like, Give me a sci-fi vampire movie.
Let's do it. Did we get?
I mean, I know we've had sci-fi-ish vampires.
They've tried. Wasn't there a Dracula 3000 that took place in space? It was a really shitty low
Shit, I
budget,
don't
probably
know.
like an asylum movie. Yeah,
I'm sure they're out
But I'd
there.
love to. I'm with you. I'd love to see that done big budget and werewolves in space, futuristic werewolves.
Yeah, let's go.
Fuck yeah, let's do it.
It's got like robot legs.
Robot leg werewolves.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting way too off topic here,
We are,
but
you
you
know.
know it sounds like fun as balls.
See, this is why you guys hang out with us, though.
That's
'Cause
right.
We're like those crazy friends you hang out with till 3 a.m. We're all sitting on the front porch. We
Right.
said we were going to go 5 times already, like 3 hours ago, but we're still here.
Yeah, the old Midwest goodbye. Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
we're from Indiana, so
Yeah, you know
this
that's
is how
we roll.
do it.
And yeah, we're those, like you said, we're those crazy friends at 3 a.m. We like have no money, but we have great ideas for really crazy movies. And you're like, you go to another party and you're hanging out with other friends. You're like, yo, my friends talked about this movie with a werewolf with robot legs, and you're like, what? And it's like, yeah, so it's just like this legend that grows. So
Yeah.
So, but instead telling
That's
your
gonna
friends,
be our
yeah.
new our other merch drop is gonna be
We're those
techno
friends.
noir werewolf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to keep talking about more werewolf movies here.
Yeah.
I think the one we have to talk about next is one of our absolute favorites, and it has spawned a franchise.
Yes.
One of the only werewolf franchises I can really think of, Ginger Snaps.
Fuck
The
yes.
original film from 2000, starring Catherine Isabelle and Emily Perkins, which became this, it's a Canadian film. It spawned a phenomenon, in my opinion, in the horror community
Yeah.
of these just this movie you didn't expect, that nobody saw coming, that nobody could have anticipated, and yet it made such a huge impact on all of us.
Yes, and especially with the women, it's a very feminist forward movie. Whether it is, sitting at the dinner table and the way the mom is talking to the daughters, the way the mom interacts with the dad, which clearly they don't have the best relationship. You've got these two sisters who do everything together, they have a death pact together, basically.
Yeah, and that's how the movie starts, by the way. Like, if you haven't seen Ginger Snaps, I highly recommend it, because
Yeah,
the
get
first
ready for that opening.
the first scenes you get are literally these two teenage sisters taking pictures of each other in various death poses.
Yes,
like they've
murder,
died.
suicide
Yeah, murder,
things.
suicide. It's like it's a hardcore trigger warning, and it's from the very beginning.
Yes.
If you have a problem with self-unaliving or even unaliving of other people,
Or
because it's all
self-harm, all
insinuated. It is all insinuated in
Yeah.
just those first few seconds.
For sure. And there's something very macabre about them. They both wear like little bird skull necklaces. It's kind of like their BFF bracelet if you were like a weird goth kid.
Right,
who
they're
liked
goth. They're
murder.
goth sisters and they're goth BFFs, which is
Yes.
just it's a new spin on that whole high school dynamic of these girls who are inseparable. You look back at movies like Jawbreaker, where it's like these pacts are made between these two teenage girls, and these two teen girls are sisters, and they take that a step further, and they have
Yeah.
a suicide pact, basically,
Yeah.
or a murder-suicide pact, or a death pact, where if one dies, the other would fall on the sword as well, basically.
Right, exactly. And there's something so beautiful to their relationship through the movie, and the way it kind of changes as it goes on, because one of them unfortunately has an encounter with a werewolf and starts to go through teen girl growing pains.
Right, but it's so the werewolf is the reason she's attacked by the werewolf is because she gets her period.
Yes.
She gets her period, so and of course werewolves are attracted to blood. So it's literally this terrific plot of like, you can follow the logic. It's one of those movies where it's like, this is so outlandish and out of this world because it's a werewolf movie, but it makes sense
It
that if
makes-
werewolves are attracted to
absolutely.
blood, women who are on their period would be unfortunately a very big target.
Right. It's
Like,
like, a shark in water kind of a
It
thing.
literally is, and so yeah,
But it has
yeah.
this beautiful imagery to it because she is a teen girl who is starting to go through hormonal changes, which, I mentioned the dinner table scene, but it's iconic that she's sitting there rubbing her back, and the mom's who always has a cute sweater and a headband on.
Mimi
It's just
Rogers
so-
as the mom
Yes.
deserves all the awards. That
But
was
she's
the
like-
best role.
Oh, why's your back hurting, sweetie? Oh, I think she's got period cramps.
Yeah.
And it's just like, are you and like, it's
It's so
embarrassing
good.
because as a teen, I obviously relate to this, and any other uterus haver out there is going to relate to this. But there's nothing.
Uteruses over deuteruses for sure.
Fuck yeah. But there's been a stigma around it for so long, and especially put it into this movie because I remember being a young girl and like wanting to hide my tampons, grabbing them out of my purse, and like you get that shit in the movie. Like she's embarrassed about her period.
Yeah, it's as much a movie about a coming of age movie for girls as much as it is a werewolf movie.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's directed by a man, John Fawcett, but he had a terrific writing partner, Karen Walton, who helped him. They both devised this idea of this movie that would serve as an allegory for women going through, young girls discovering their menstruation and going through puberty, as well as a werewolf story. So Catherine Isabel's character is Ginger, it's i.e. the title Ginger Snaps, and she is attacked by a werewolf. Her sister Bridget, played by Emily Perkins, is her only confidant in the world who knows what's going on with her. And together they go through, as Ginger goes through these physical as well as these emotional changes. Sound familiar?
Right.
And as they go through this, as Ginger discovers these new things about herself, not only as a woman, but also as a werewolf.
Right. Because she's like, I kind of like boys, but also I kind of like the way boys taste.
Right. I kind of want to eat them and kill them.
Every part of her transformation, which is slow through the movie. You don't get a one scene transformation for Ginger. Hers is slow and progressive. Like she starts to grow a fucking tail.
Right.
Like, can you imagine waking up with a tiny little tail coming out of your pelvic bone? Like that's how slow her stuff is.
It is. It's very slow, very methodical. They take their time with it.
Yeah.
But it's one of the few movies too where I love it because it's this whole teen story of I'm going to help cure you. I'm going to help save you. Because her sister Bridget tries to devise a cure using wolf's bane.
Yep.
And and ultimately, it leads to the climax of the movie, which leads to its sequel, Ginger Snaps 2 Unleashed. And where Bridget continues the journey, and Bridget at the end of the movie becomes a werewolf herself, or is infected to become a werewolf.
So the interesting thing you mentioned, the wolfsbane, is it's actually effective. Like they find a whole process. It's very hard drug looking when they process it.
Whereas
like
Ginger
burning
Snaps
it in a spoon and putting it in a syringe kind of shit.
Exactly.
But
so Ginger Snaps 2 takes the narrative from you go from a movie about menstruation and puberty to a movie honestly about drug abuse and
mental health, drug abuse. Because she goes through all of these issues, but she's also trying to make the drug, keeping things at bay.
Right.
Worried about transforming when it ultimately doesn't have prevent it.
Yeah, and she finds herself in a mental hospital because of course they believe she is crazy and addicted to drugs because they find her, they see her trying to shoot up and try to get her fix, quote unquote, and talking all these things about werewolves and wolfsbane, and just creates this impression that she's crazy, and she finds herself in a mental hospital with other girls who are deemed crazy. One of which I want to point out at the recording time that we're recording this episode, Tatiana Maslany, who many will now know as Jennifer Walters' She-Hulk attorney at law. Tatiana Maslany plays a ghost who is basically the girl who helps bring Bridget out of this mental hospital. And in the end twist, ends up kidnapping Bridget in werewolf form. And you'll find out that's the end of Bridget's story. That's the last thing we know that happens to Bridget, because Ginger Snaps Back, the beginning, is a prequel.
Yeah.
So that's how the end. That's how the story ends.
Yep.
And then we go back and literally back in time to Ginger Snaps Back, the beginning.
Almost like a colonial day vibe thing. Small little town building weird walls. Honestly, probably because they're settling on ground that they shouldn't settle on. You get that vibe.
You get the Native American folklore aspect of werewolves, and we go back to the beginning of the legend, where ostensibly the origin of the werewolves that bit Bridget in the first, or not bit Bridget, but bit Ginger in the first movie and started this whole thing, date back to the happenings, the occurrences in the third movie, Ginger Snaps Back, the beginning.
Yeah. So you basically still get two sisters. Throwback, they still have like the little skull necklace things. But they're, same situation. One of them has a problem, one of them doesn't, but they're all running around a old, cold fort in winter with cool Victorian clothing.
It is. It's a beautiful movie.
Yeah.
You could tell the budget was bigger for the third movie, and I'm happy it was. But it does. It feels.
It's bizarre, but it's a really. I love this movie.
I do too.
It's just I almost
It's
wanted
different.
more of the teens from the first two.
Right, and I respect them for not retreading old ground, but at the same time, I think we all did want that. But again,
Right.
on the bright side, it's still Catherine Isabel and Emily Perkins, which to me they are the heart and soul of the Ginger
Yeah.
Snaps franchise, and I don't think you could do a movie without either one of them.
Right, because even with the second one, Catherine Isabel is
Limited
still
in
it,
her role.
limited in
Yeah.
the role, but she's still in it.
She's still there. Yeah.
Kind of spoilers. I know it's an older movie. Hopefully you guys have seen it by now, but usually werewolves don't make it. So,
yeah.
you
It's kind of a theme with this is that hey, you're infected with this. Spoiler alert: you're not really gonna go far with this. Sorry.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And ironically, Catherine Isabel came back to play a witch on a also canceled Netflix show called The Order, where she falls in love with a werewolf.
Yeah, the Catherine Isabel is another.
She's my queen.
We mentioned her in Scream Queens and Final
Yeah.
Girls. We didn't really talk about her too much, but she is.
I could talk about her all day.
We could, and we keep talking about doing these heroes of horror episodes, and I think
Yeah.
Catherine Isabel's going to
Yeah.
be deserving of her own episode.
Yeah, because she's. I don't recall exactly how much we mentioned of her, but she's probably one of my favorite Final Girls. Because she is one.
Yeah, she is, and she's got so many great roles. Emily Perkins was a little bit more limited in her career. She didn't go on to do terribly too much.
Right, but when you get to say you played Beverly fucking Marsh and Stephen King's It,
Exactly.
like that's it.
Yes,
That's it. You're
and
cool.
that's the other role you would recognize her from.
Yeah.
The 1990 miniseries Stephen King's It, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace.
Yep.
Emily Perkins plays the OG Beverly Marsh on
Yep.
screen, and it's
She's
a
awesome.
terrific role by her. But yeah, I think a lot of us again will, I think her legacy will forever be Ginger Snaps.
Yeah. And kind of with that, we didn't touch too much on the actual werewolf of that movie, but it is another where you have practical effect transformation.
It is, and again, you could tell they were on a budget with, especially with that first movie being a low budget Canadian
a lot of
kind of
the-
indie flick.
The camera play that I feel like you can do really well with a creature feature where you show bits and pieces and you don't necessarily have to show the whole puppet or person in a suit that you necessarily have to. But it's one of those that I think I like a lot because they kind of, like, she's a redhead and she almost stays like this pale color. And she even has werewolf breasts, which is like kind of a...
Yes.
I mean, I think that there was some of that in The Howling, maybe.
Yeah.
Again, I vaguely
you
remember
get
some
werewolf
of the...
bobs.
Yeah. I think it's in the weird sequels. I vaguely remember a bonfire and werewolves. But, you get that, but it's, again, part of that womanly transformation shit that you get with Ginger Snaps.
It's so well done.
But, we've talked a lot about the really cool practical werewolves. Started to touch on the CG because you get a blend of practical and CG in Underworld. There's a lot of kind of close-ups where you can tell they're kind of maybe suits or puppetry thing going on. But, we started to get a lot of CG werewolves. And the reason I said the lull is because I feel like we haven't had a lot of traditional freaky werewolf movies for a while. There's been a lot of big wolves. Like, and the quickest and easiest one to say would be like in Twilight.
Like Twilight, yeah.
But you also got them in, there was a movie called Red Riding Hood that had Amanda Seyfried in it.
Yeah.
Where it takes Little Red Riding Hood but makes it a werewolf story.
Yeah, it came out around the same time as The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro.
Yes.
And I think it had a very similar feel to it. Like aesthetically, like I said, it was just dark and not aesthetically pleasing.
It was, for sure. And I remember it had good music, and I kind of liked the idea of taking a classic story and kind of flipping it on its head and not just making it the big bad wolf and actually making it a werewolf. It just had a weird execution, and there was a lot of, like, you can hear the werewolf talking, like it's like projecting thought shit, and it was just bizarre.
It's there are some risks that these filmmakers have taken with their portrayals of werewolves and other classic creatures that just have not paid off.
But I kind of respect the differences, again, because like what we mentioned in the beginning, there are a lot of different folklore stories about what their werewolves look like, and I think the traditional wolf as like kind of deriving a little more on the shapeshifter side.
Right.
has kind of gone into a lot of those movies.
Right, which harkens back to a lot of the old Native American culture.
Right, exactly.
As well, which I appreciate when I appreciate when films can do that,
Yeah.
and kind of get the different local color out of it. You know, like I said, here in the States, the history of the Native Americans and their connection to wolves and shapeshifters and all of those, and then of course in England and France.
Right.
The beasts that were spotted on the countryside that were believed to be man-sized wolves, you know, normal creatures that we're used to, but they were man-sized, which created the legend of werewolves over
and
there.
even the one that I kind of remember just from my obsession with these kinds of things, and I used to read about it all the time. The Lugaroo, which is kind of like they almost have like a wolf pelt that they like use to transform. It's like I might be getting that wrong. I just remember the name because it's one of those I think French names. So it's as a basic bitch in Indiana who doesn't know any French. It was kind of one of those weird words for me that's kind of stuck in my head because of it. But even that, like the concept of having like a wolf pelt that is kind of part of you, and they kind of do a little bit of that to come back to it, that show on Netflix, The Order. That's kind of how the werewolves are in the show, is like the pelt picks them and they become a werewolf.
Yeah, I had not seen The Order, but I remember from what you had told me, it has some pretty kick-ass scenes, especially involving the wolves.
Yeah, it does.
One thing you mentioned, the French word that I won't even try to pronounce either.
Loup-garou.
Over in France, one of my favorite legends is the Beast of Gévaudan, which was again very old. I want to say this is early 1800s, maybe even before that. And it was a beast French countryside. They were finding dead bodies, and it was they attributed it to looked like wolf attacks, but it looked like it was too big to be just a normal wolf. So it was like, again, all the legends kind of, and it was said to have inspired it is what is said to have inspired the original Wolfman legends that turned into what ultimately became the Universal classic movie monster.
I like that.
So yeah, that's kind of where the origins of the story are from. But yeah, as we've talked about a lot of movies here, I think we're going to touch upon a few more that have kind of impacted us. And not all of these are going to be necessarily straight up just horror movies. Some of these are just the ones that have inspired us. Like I know before we went on and started recording, we were talking about Goosebumps episode, one of my favorites, a little mini movie called The Werewolf of Fever Swamp. Terrific little novel, and of course an even better, in my opinion, just one of the best pieces of werewolf fiction that's out there. The way in the little Goosebumps mini movie thing, the way it's done is it's shot so gloomy and so nasty, and it's a werewolf of Fever Swamp. So it's like it gets the swamp aesthetic right, and then you have this really cool story between this kid who goes to live with I think it's his grandfather in the middle of nowhere, and he meets a kid, this little dirty white kid in the middle of nowhere at the swamp. And he starts to suspect that this dirty white kid isn't just any ordinary dirty white kid. He's a werewolf.
Little dirty swamp boy.
Little dirty swamp werewolf rat boy. And it's just so well done. And it's just this little cute mystery. R.L. Stine has this great way of balancing these childlike stories of like, oh, I think my best friend's a werewolf, but also adding genuine kind of scary shit to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us had a lot, our Goosebumps episodes we were scared of. I actually just recently saw something of his where he was talking about how people call him the teen's introduction to Stephen King.
Yeah, that's fair.
And that he hadn't met him for years until I think recently. And it's just so bizarre to me because I feel like those are two people who would have crossed paths at some point. But at the same time, you're like, but would they? Because like one of them writes a, interdimensional clown thing that feeds off of fear. Among other fucked up things in that novel. Yeah. And then R.L. Stine's like, what if this mask fused to this girl's face?
I'm going to do monster blood. It's hamsters, y'all.
Yeah, right?
Fucking Slappy
Say
the dummy.
Say cheese and die.
Say cheese and die. piano lessons can be murder. Yeah.
But I mean, I was pretty young when those started to come out, and
Yeah.
I would eat that shit
Oh,
up.
they were so
I
much
wanted
fun.
to read every Goosebumps book at the library, watch every episode.
We'll probably end up doing a whole episode devoted to devoted to Goosebumps. Yeah,
Goosebumps,
for sure.
R.L. Stein. Obviously we recently had Fear Street.
Fear Street, yeah, putting R.L. Stein back in the discussion of
He just
horror.
knows how to do it. He just knows how to do it
He knows,
in a fun way.
He knows how to scare the young folks.
He does.
Yeah, so some other things that inspired me, like I mentioned again before we came on the air, there's an old TV show, and I think it was Canadian too. Canadians are obsessed with werewolves, and I dig it. If you're listening, you're from Canada, and you like werewolves, you found the right show. But yeah, it was called Big Wolf on Campus, and it had it was that perfect early 2000s. It was like, for kids, you want to dip your toe into horror movies and horror TV shows, this is a great way to do it, because it's this fun little cheeky comedy about a kid who is a werewolf, but he has to balance being a werewolf while also going to high school. What?
It's a very Teen Wolf vibe, right?
It is. Yeah, it is. And we'll get to Teen Wolf here in a sec.
I mean, he's another
Yeah.
hair patch but leave the clothes on kind of iconic.
Oh my God,
Wolfman
yeah.
vibe.
Fuck it. We're just going to move on to Teen Wolf, because Teen Wolf shaped me as a kid. It was one of my, that's another
it's
introduction
fantastic.
into werewolf and horror movies. Even though it's not a horror movie, it's still obviously.
Hey, we're all things horror 80s, 90s, and today.
Exactly. Yeah, that is one of my favorite 80s movies. I mean, first off, Michael J. Fox is one
Hell
of my
yeah.
favorite actors of all time.
Yeah.
Secondly, I mean, it's Michael J. Fox playing a fucking basketball playing werewolf. It's the best. It's like the best plot ever. Like, how can you not love Teen Wolf?
That's a Mad Libs. And it's perfect.
It really is. It is like,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh my God, like I'll never forget. I don't know why this quote stands out in my mind. There's the scene when he becomes a werewolf and he becomes really good at basketball and he attracts the attention of the popular girl in school. But her boyfriend is pissed off at her. And this is just one of those random fucking lines that sticks out to me, where the old boyfriend goes up to her while, Scott, Michael J. Fox's character, is away, and he looks at the girl and he's like, "What's going to happen when you guys get older? Are you going to have puppies?" And I'm just like, it was just one of those fucking stupid fucking lines that I don't know why I remember. It's so, so fucking, and when you think about it, it's so fucking disgusting too.
That's pretty weird.
It's like, if you ever remember in the early days of the internet, if you used to be a fucking internet pirate like me, where you would illegally download all your shit, there was always the ad that says, "Look at this dog-human hybrid. You won't believe it." And it's that iconic sculpture that the artist did, where it's literally a human-dog hybrid.
Human dog,
it's
weird
so
flesh
fucked up.
tone. Yeah.
But it's like, that's what, like, that's my rabbit hole of thoughts and shit. Yeah, but yeah, Teen Wolf, going back to the original point here, Teen Wolf was... it was so funny. It was Michael J. Fox. It was, and of course it inspired the TV show Teen Wolf on MTV. Really deviated from the source material, but it is what it is. And then we also got a sequel.
I was gonna say, aren't there like a couple of series now?
Well,
I feel like there was a more recent Teen Wolf that did pretty well.
Yeah, it deviated.
Okay.
Though, is all I'm saying.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
it's like, it was good. It did well, but it deviated from the source material.
Okay,
and then we have the sequel with Jason Bateman that also took place in the 80s as well. So Michael J. Fox, Jason Bateman both played, in both the Teen Wolf movies, and it was just so well done. Like, to me, Teen Wolf is a staple of the 80s. Like, we all have our favorite 80s movies, and to me, like, it just feels like, what if John Hughes made a werewolf movie?
Right. No,
I love it so much.
It's just one of those fun movies. I feel like there's not as many. I can't think of a lot of fun, like, werewolf stuff as much as I can other things, I think.
Well, you mentioned fun werewolves, and my mind immediately goes to What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, yeah.
Which, both the show and the movie tackle werewolves in just the most hilarious way possible.
Because, as we were talking about, earlier with the different cultural interpretations of werewolves, I think one of my favorite lines is in the show whenever they're talking about them being Indian.
Right,
and he
yeah.
goes, Naja, you mean that kind of Indian.
Yeah, Naja says, "Are you all Indian?"
Yeah.
And he says, he's like, "Well, my father's from India, but I don't think you mean that kind of Indian."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the Native American.
He's like, "But Mark here is Native American."
Yeah, and he's like, "But I'm not werewolf. It's not it's not a
It's not an ethnic thing. I'm not
an
a
ethnic
werewolf
thing.
because I'm Native American.
Right.
Yes.
And I love that they're able to touch, because you look at the different, like, he's like, here's my white guy, his name's Chad or whatever the fuck he says.
Yeah, I'm Caucasian.
I'm Caucasian. But I love that the show has this diversity with the vampires, with the werewolves,
Right.
with the other creatures in the show.
It's a funny little cheeky show, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it does promote diversity. Hell, as at the recording of this episode, we're seeing them tackle issues now of sexuality and
Yeah.
being, polyamorous and
Right,
gay,
right.
and
The-
it just I
was gonna say the episode we just watched where they're trying to get Colin Robinson into school. If you're not caught up, that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
But they sit down and they're, well, what if it's this couple and this couple? What if it's a
Right.
single parent? What if it's a gay parent? What if it's a polyamorous? What if it's
Right.
And I think the fact that they can interweave that with the comedy is genius, because nothing's ever offensive. It's just real.
No, and I love it because one thing that horror has always done a great job of is explaining social issues through these metaphors. And I think with stories like what we've talked about with What We Do in the Shadows, they're able to take these horror tropes and tell these beautiful stories with them and tackle social issues like race, like sexuality, and everything in between. And again, like, in my opinion, that's when horror has always been at its best, is
Yeah.
when it can tackle those serious issues and give us a metaphor that almost makes it this pill that's easier to swallow for those in middle America who don't think about these things on a daily basis.
Right.
But it does that, and werewolf movies are great. It's a great example of that, because you have this idea of concealing one's true self and hiding oneself from the world, and I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to one extent or another.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that can touch upon, whether it's becoming a woman, like you get with Ginger Snaps.
Right.
Some of the other movies, they make it a little bit more sexual. I was sitting here trying to think of if there were any like queer horror werewolf movies, and I'm sure that there probably are. But, it does feel a little queer.
Yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of it, when you think about just like the principles behind it, again, like I said, hiding oneself, concealing a big part of who you are, and how even to an extent there's you only feel safe trusting that information to certain key people. There's a lot of I think you can see
only
the
let your
similarities
gay out
there
in safe places.
Right. It's I think that allegory, that analogy is always there, in my opinion, with a lot of these.
Yeah. No, 100%. I like that a lot. And now I just need to try to find gay werewolf movies, because I think I want to see those.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's some movies on that we want to kind of just mention rapid fire here real quick that either one of us hasn't seen or neither of us have seen, that are really on our watch list, but we just want to shout them out because they've been mentioned to us by so many people, they've been talked about by so many people, that we feel like they do deserve some attention and some love.
Yeah. What'd you have in mind?
So I mean, Stephen King's Silver Bullet. I have not seen that movie.
Yeah, okay.
You have seen that movie. You enjoyed that one.
Yeah, so you get Corey Haim and you get wild Gary Busey, which I feel like...
You had me at Gary Busey.
Now I just want to say his Busey. But he plays Uncle Red, who's like the kind of weird relative that they don't quite want around because he's like the cool, fun uncle. And then you have kids being... killed by a werewolf. There's actually a really disturbing scene in his short novel about them just finding like a bloody kite in the park and like parts of a body.
Yeah.
And they have to make a silver bullet so they can try to kill this werewolf that's running around town killing kids and trying to find out who the werewolf is. It's a weird movie. It's 1985. It's bizarre, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's that, and there's a couple we haven't seen. Werewolves Within, which I've told is more of a horror comedy with werewolves, which I'm always in favor of. Has some terrific actors in it, but got some amazing reviews out of the gate.
Yeah.
So that was one I definitely recommend checking out. One of my favorite actors, Sam Richardson, who has been in a lot of different things. He's popped up. If you see him, you'll know him. He's one of those actors who's that guy from that thing.
Yeah.
But he finally gets a leading role in Werewolves Within. And then the other one is Jim Cummings' pet project, The Wolf of Snow Hollow,
Yeah.
which everybody,
A lot of people talked about.
oh my
that
gosh, overwhelmingly positive reviews. Again, we have not seen that, so it's on our watch list. If you see it before us, please let us know how it is if you've already seen it. Again, horrorzoidpod@gmail.com, horrorzoidpod on TikTok. Hit us up, and don't forget horrorzoid.com. I'll plug the website. We're paying for it.
Man.
Might as well. But yeah, we've talked about a lot of werewolf movies. I think we've touched upon a lot of our favorites. We want to hear from you, though, what you like, what you thought were some of the best ones, and ones we should talk about that maybe we completely glossed over.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably a lot of those.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us for another great episode, and we look forward to talking with you next week. Wait till you see what we got in store for you next week.
Super stoked.
Yep. And on that note,
remember, we're not swearwolves.
we're werewolves. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes drop every weekend. Follow us on TikTok @HorrorZoidPod and send emails to horrorzoidpod@gmail.com with your thoughts, questions, and stories for us to read on a future episode. To all our Zoids out there, stay scary.